Bill C-10 was a law that gave the government jurisdiction over the internet. Bill C-36, introduced the day before Parliament closed, showed how they were making hate speech another crime or near crime in the law, as well as introducing a pre-crime law that would allow judges to sentence people to house arrest or other restrictions based on your fear of them. That's what we knew when Parliament was sitting. But Stephen Guilbeault and the other cabinet ministers working for Justin Trudeau waited until today before revealing their master plan to censor the internet. In terms of a piece of legislation, it's not actually a bill. You can't issue a bill when Parliament is not sitting. It's just an announcement, but it's the most detailed announcement I think I've ever seen that wasn't a bill. In addition to the announcement, there's pages and pages of technical notes letting you know exactly how they plan to do it. They waited so Parliament was not in session, so they couldn't be asked about it in question periods, so they can't be studied by parliamentary committees. But you better believe they plan on doing it. As I've shown you before, since Stephen Guilbeault was made the Heritage Minister, censoring the internet was literally the number 2 item on his job description, called a mandate letter from the Prime Minister. Number 1, of course, being handing out money to the good boys and girls in the media party. That's job 1. Job 2 is punishing all the others. Stephen Guilbeault is probably the worst cabinet minister other than Catherine McKenna in terms of sheer dislikability and incompetence. Remember this when he went on CTV and accidentally spoke the truth and said, yeah, he wants to license all the news media in Canada. Remember this?
They're recommending that content providers have to register and get a license. So how will this work? How are you going to regulate websites? How are you going to register all that? Do you buy these recommendations?
Well, one of the recommendations, so you're talking about a couple of different things here, but as far as the licensing is concerned, is if you're a distributor of content in Canada, and obviously, you know, if you're a very small media organization, the requirement probably wouldn't be the same as if you're Facebook or Google. So there would have to be some proportionality embedded into this. But we would ask that they have a license, yes.
The reaction was very strong, and he had to walk that back, but he actually didn't change his mind. He just thought he would make the reporters feel better. Later, he told eager reporters at a Canada 2020 conference that indeed he plans to regulate the internet. And get this, one of the things he wants to crack down on the hardest was anyone criticizing politicians. That, he said, was a top priority. Get a load of this.
We've seen too many examples of public officials retreating from public service due to the hateful online content targeted towards themselves or even their families.
Seriously, I don't know if you know, but in terms of how we protect speech, there's commercial speech, which has some protection. There's religious speech, but the speech that actually gets the most protection in our society is political speech, to criticize the government. You can understand why, because without it, all our other freedoms could wash away. That's what Stephen Guilbeault hates the most. And he says that if he doesn't get his way, if people don't bend the knee and stop criticizing politicians, well, he might go to the nuclear option. Listen to him say that.
Could we envision having blocking orders? I mean, maybe. It's not, you know, it would likely be a last result nuclear bomb in a toolbox of mechanism for a regulator.
Well, the nuclear option was dropped today. There's one more thing I want to play you from that Stephen Guilbeault video, because it also came true today. It's a very Orwellian doublethink way of talking. Of course, freedom of the press helps the most marginalized. If you already have power and have money and are in a position of authority, you don't actually need free speech. You've got the stuff. But the more marginalized you are, the more you rely on free speech. Think about Martin Luther King when he took on the entire establishment in the civil rights movement in the 60s. He had nothing. other than the power of speech. The suffragette movement, nothing but the power of speech. The movement to stop the slave trade, it did not have the power or the money, it had the free speech. But according to Stephen Guilbeault, Justin Trudeau's errand boy on this project, in order to have free speech, you have to censor people. You have to silence some people, he believes, in order to allow his friends to speak. That's the other thing he said at that conference.
By not acting, we are, in fact, not ensuring a great number of Canadians freedom of expression and freedom of speech, because they can't express themselves on these platforms the way they in a safe manner, and the way they have a right to.
Well, that was all weeks ago, and I've been showing you this and talking to you about this for months at Rebel News. Well, today was the day they did it. Like I say, waiting until Parliament was over, so there's no question period. And do you really think that the media party that eats out of his hands $600 million a year in bailouts, do you really think they're going to ask him tough questions? So here's a press release called Creating a Safe, Inclusive, and Open Online Environment from Canadian Heritage. You know, that's very Orwellian in itself, like calling the Ministry of Propaganda the Ministry of Truth. It's not going to be any more safe. In fact, it's going to be dangerous if you have any dissonant ideas. It's not more open. Every tool in this toolbox is about welding people's mouths shut. And it's certainly not inclusive. It's only inclusive if you're a friend of the government, not if you're a critic. I'll read the entire press release to you and I'll talk to you more about it. The Government of Canada is committed to taking concrete action to combat serious forms of harmful online content, specifically hate speech, terrorist content, content that incites violence, child sexual exploitation content, and the non-consensual distribution of intimate images. Isn't that an interesting combination of ideas? Because I think there was 4 ideas, 3 of them, obviously 99.9% of Canadians would agree. Crimes inciting violence, there ought to be a law. In fact, there is. That's already against the law. And whether you incite violence in real life or on the radio or on TV or in a print newspaper or through a telegram or through the internets, it's all against the law. That's already covered. Same thing with terrorism. Terrorism is already against the law. And our criminal code was brought up to speed, up to date after 9/11. There are many specific crimes in the criminal code that touch upon supporting terrorists even online. That's already handled. Same thing with child sex trafficking, revenge porn. That's something that can be treated without censoring the entire internet in general. That's something that ought to be done, and I believe is done already in some jurisdictions. But look what they hid amongst those. Everyone agrees in banning revenge porn and child exploitation and terrorism and inciting. We all agree with that. I know we do, because those are already laws. But in the middle of there, they have offensive speech, hate speech, speech that causes harm. I know what speech that's a crime is, uttering a death threat, inciting violence. But what they've done here, and you'll see this all the way through, is they've buried their real purpose. Harmful speech, not illegal speech, not criminal speech, just speech they don't like, speech that makes fun of politicians, speech that maybe drowns out their political enemies. They've buried that amongst the terrorism and the child pornography. So if you dare to oppose this, they'll surely say, what, are you against terrorism laws? Actually, it's Trudeau that's against terrorism laws. He gave a big fat apology and $10.5 million to a terrorist called Omar Khadr. That's beside the point. Let me read some more. Today, the Honourable Stephen Guilbeault, Minister of Canadian Heritage, alongside the Honourable Bill Blair, Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, and the Honourable David Lametti, Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, launched a public consultation on a proposed approach for promoting a safe, inclusive, and open online environment. The proposal has been informed by extensive work led by the government over the last year on the issue of online harm. Inclusive, eh? Only an Orwellian censor would describe cutting things down and shutting mouths as inclusive. It reflects targeted engagement with communities that experience inequitable outcomes or treatment, including victims of hate speech and organizations combating child sexual exploitation. The proposal also draws on insights from civil society and advocacy groups from across Canada and on approaches taken by Canada's international partners. Targeted engagement, what does that mean? That means they spoke to lobby groups, including lobby groups that they funded to get the green light for their censorship plans. Inequitable outcomes, by that they mean people who they don't think that they're being listened to enough and that people should stop listening to others. For example, if there's a YouTube channel that only has a few thousand viewers, but let's say, Rebel News with 1.5 million subscribers, well, that's inequitable and it's not inclusive enough. You heard Stephen Gilbeault. He says in order to prop up his friends, he's going to have to squash his enemies a bit. I think the most troubling part there is he refers to international partners. By that, I think they mean foreign censors. Even, as you know, 2 years ago, when Canada co-sponsored a media freedom conference in London, Chrystia Freeland attended and had a secret meeting with the foreign minister of Pakistan. It wasn't on her itinerary. She didn't tell any Western media about it. It was only when that foreign minister of Pakistan boasted about it and published the pictures that we knew. Is that an example about the foreign and international partners that Trudeau is listening to when it comes to censorship? I'll read some more. The government aims to present a new legislative and regulatory framework this fall, with rules to make social media platforms and other online services more accountable and transparent in combating harmful online content. This framework would also contemplate the role of law enforcement and security and intelligence agencies in addressing the real-world impacts of online harm. These proposals aim to support inclusive online participation and protect public safety while protecting the freedom of expression and privacy of Canadians online. Again, they talked about terrorism and child pornography so that you would say, yes, I agree with this. But now that we're into it, they're talking about inclusive participation. They're talking about regulating things that are not crimes. If you want to regulate terrorism, do so. And the good news is we did so 20 years ago. If you want to regulate revenge porn or child exploitation, do so. And indeed, we do. But that's not what this law is about. I'll continue. Seeking public input on the complex and technical elements of regulating harmful online content is an important step in establishing this framework. Notice how they use the word harmful, not illegal. They've already banned the illegal stuff. That's why it's called illegal. Harmful is just stuff that Stephen Gilbeault doesn't like insults. He told us. I'll read some more. More specifically, the government's proposed regulatory framework would define the types of harmful content to be regulated, establish which entities would be subject to the new rules, set out new rules and obligations for regulated entities, and create new regulatory bodies to administer the new framework. In the weeks ahead, the government will also hold roundtable discussions to have focused conversations on aspects of the law enforcement and national security proposals. Yeah, it'll be fascinating to see who is invited. Like they're going to have targeted meetings with their friends who will tell them exactly what they want to hear. In fact, I predict that most of the people who are consulted are people that the Liberal Party pays through government grants to toe their line. It's just an echo chamber. I don't think there will be many true civil libertarians allowed at these events because, first of all, there aren't very many true civil libertarians allowed in Canada anymore at all. And second of all, this government doesn't really consult. They put together focus groups, or more likely just defenders who will repeat their talking points and say, yeah, we support this censorship because it's about inclusion. I'll read some more. This includes how the regulatory framework can be structured to require the removal of serious forms of harmful online content, facilitate the investigation of potential criminal activity online, and disrupt threats to public safety and national security, all while supporting victims and protecting Canadians' privacy and charter rights. Well, this reminds me a little bit about what they're doing south of the border, and I don't think it's a coincidence either. I think we know that for years, the Liberal Party of Canada has had Democratic Party operatives helping to run their campaign, something that if the Conservatives ever did with Republicans would be an endless scandal in the media. I think it's pretty much taken for granted that the Liberals and the Democrats in the States work together. In the States, they're focusing on censorship. Their inquiry into the events of January 6th, which is the great meandering when people broke into the Capitol building and then just sort of wandered around and put their feet up on desks. That's an attempt to redefine anyone who supported Donald Trump as a domestic violent extremist. As I said on the show this week, I don't support break and enter or trespass or vandalism or mischief. But the only person murdered that day was Ashley Babbitt, a protester who happened to be a military veteran. Brian Sicknick, the officer who the media claimed died that day, according to the coroner's office, died later from natural causes. But yet that event is being trumped up into basically a 9/11 domestically to give a justification for the FBI and others to go after anyone conservative, to demonize half the country. I fear that that's the battle plan for Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. You heard Stephen Guilbeault himself. This is about people who criticize politicians. He said so. And you can see here that they're talking about harms now. They're not talking about crimes. I'm all in favor of hunting crime in every form, whether it's on a ship at sea or a real world building or on the internet. The criminal code, luckily, applies to all of these, but that's not what this is about. I'll read some more. The government welcomes all comments, perspectives, and evidence concerning these issues and potential options. Submissions will help inform the incoming legislation. No, they don't. I know that they don't. They ban us. They specifically ban Rebel News from press conferences. Stephen Guilbeault has personally banned me from following him on Twitter. In fact, we launched a lawsuit against him because he was banning me from getting official government releases on his Twitter account. And he's hiring lawyers to fight that. That pettiness and that targeting his political disagreeers rather than targeting criminals gives the game away. Stephen Guilbeault is not interested in fighting terrorism. He himself is a convicted criminal who engaged in a little bit of eco-terrorism himself. Stephen Guilbeault doesn't care about terrorism. He's a criminal. He cares about silencing people like Rebel News. Canadians and stakeholders have until September 25 to submit their comments. Click here to participate. We will. In fact, we've already started analyzing the massive document that was attached to this press release, all the different regulators, the role that CSIS, our spy agency, will play. I think they're going to try and do the same thing they're doing in the States to turn the anti-terrorism infrastructure of the country that's designed to protect us against another 9/11 or another shooting as Al-Qaeda did and ISIS did on our parliament. I think they're trying to turn the anti-terrorism machinery towards domestic conservatives. I think that's pretty clear. We will make submissions on this. We're going to put together the best we can. I'm certain it'll be ignored. They've already said they're going to have specific targeted meetings with their friends. But we'll go through the motions anyways. We have to. It'll also be an education for us of how bad this bill is and a preparation for when this bill is introduced and then becomes law. I promise you right now, the Rebel News will fight this in court all the way to the Supreme Court. This is the bill we've been warning you about for pretty much a year, or even more really, since the Liberal Party banned us from even reporting on the national debates. Stephen Guilbeault, Justin Trudeau, and the rest of their thin-skinned cry-bullies always say they're harmed by our questions, and they want to silence us and censor us. And the rest of the civil libertarians haven't been there, and the progressive conservatives, or the CPC as it's now called. Well, here's Aaron O'Toole's hand-picked critic for heritage. His name is Alain Reyes. Here he is in Parliament talking about this very thing, talking about Stephen Guilbeault's plans to regulate the internet, Facebook, YouTube. Take a listen.
But we don't see it in the bill. There's nothing in this bill that allows for the regulation of social media or platforms like YouTube. And it's clear, we would have liked to have seen this in the bill. The minister even says we have to find a way of preventing hate speech, conspiracy theories, and fake news that's shared. But right now in the bill, unfortunately, we won't even be able to amend it in that aspect, and because it's simply absent from the bill.
Yeah, he's the opposition critic, but he's not opposing. And he's not criticizing other than saying he wished the government would go farther. I'm actually quite worried that the Conservative Party of Canada and Aaron O'Toole and Alan Reyes might not even oppose this. They're too worried about being told that they're sympathetic with domestic violent extremists or whatever. The wording of this, it's not a bill, it's a pre-bill. The wording of it is designed so if you oppose it, people will say, oh, what, are you sympathetic to terrorism? What, are you sympathetic to child exploitation? No. It's the free speech you buried in the middle of it that I'm worried about. They attach a technical paper for more study, they say. I've started to study it. It's a massive thing. I'll read a little bit. Technical paper. The aim of this discussion paper is to present a proposed framework for an act of Parliament. It reflects one of several possible approaches. The paper does not imply approval by any party of the approaches or concepts in it. Any eventual act may be supplemented by regulations made under the act. Well, of course it reflects the work of this government. Of course it was published by Stephen Guilbeault, and it's a result of his 2-year project to come up with a censorship plan. Of course this reflects the Liberal view, and they want it talked about, and they want it talked about when they're in control of the conversation, which is why they did it outside of Parliament. I promise you this will be our largest fight of the year. Now, we're still battling on the lockdown issue. As you know, we have over 2,000 cases at Fight the Fines. It's very important. But this, I think, is them coming to kill us. And our friends at True North and the Post Millennial and Spencer Fernando and anyone else who doesn't toe the line. There's two ways with Justin Trudeau. Either he pays you, like the CBC or the Post Media bailout, or he bans you. There's nothing in between. We're starting a petition at stopthecensorship.ca. Stopthecensorship.ca. If you sign up there, I'll send you a copy of our submissions to the government. I know they'll be ignored by the government, but I hope that they inform the world what's going on in Canada. And we'll surely sue as soon as this is law. But they're really not waiting, are they? We know what they're going to do. They're coming to silence us, but they're coming to silence you too. That's an excerpt from my daily show, The Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.